I want to start by doing a quick recap on what the original article of impeachment was. So remember, Donald Trump was impeached officially on January 13th, so about just over 2 weeks ago, as a result of what happened on January 6th. January 6th was the Capitol Hill riot date, and that was not a good day, right? I came on the program and I said, hey, what we saw there was unacceptable, totally, gross behavior and not anything that we want to endorse or support. And then it sort of morphed into this, incitement of insurrection. And now suddenly Donald Trump was responsible for all of that horror that we saw. And then they started to kind of expand the scope of this thing a little bit to not only be about Donald Trump on that particular day, but also everything that Donald Trump has said basically since the election day back on November 3rd. And then it was not even about only Donald Trump anymore. Now it was about all of his supporters and anybody who is, I would say MAGA world. And then it even expanded further beyond that. And now we're talking about disinformation and dangerous language, and libertarians are extremists and people are being arrested for memes. And I mean, it's just kind of spiraled out of control. So what I want to do is start back and look at the original documents. Okay, the way that this works when you're talking about an impeachment, the House of Representatives is like the prosecutor. They're the ones who will identify the conduct that they think is illegal, that is an impeachable offense. They'll submit their article of impeachment. And this is very similar, in my mind, is sort of analogous to what we see in criminal law, where if somebody commits a crime, they get charged with what's called an indictment. Have you seen that in the movies or in the TV shows? Somebody's formally indicted. And that means that a prosecutor is drafting up a document. And typically, they can be pretty robust. They can be very long. They can be very short. It just depends. But typically what the prosecutor is doing there is it's their opening argument. They're going out there and they're saying, look, judge, this person did this conduct on this particular day in this location, and here's the statute that they're violating. They stole a candy bar from the candy store. This is the statute that makes that illegal. And you have some specific language, some conduct in there that will show to be a violation of that statute. The law says you can't steal a candy bar. This person on this particular day did that. And now we're going to indict that person. You wouldn't get indicted for shoplifting, but you get my picture, right? And the indictments can be short or long. And sometimes they're full of information. Other times they're less full of information. Sometimes it's just kind of the nuts and bolts. And you get the rest of it through a probable cause statement or through a police report or whatever comes down the pike later down the road. So same type of process that's happening here. In the House of Representatives, as it related to Donald Trump, they were impeaching him and they submitted what I would analogize to an indictment. They submitted, it was a 5-page document. We covered it back over on January 13th when we did our impeachment party show. And we showed you exactly what the original article of impeachment looked like, the one that was drafted by Ted Lieu. And I have a slide of it because I want to revisit it. I want to show you what the original document was, because this is how the whole impeachment party started. Everything that we were talking about, impeaching Kamala Harris, impeaching everybody, right? Every single person in Congress. We've had a lot of fun with that. But the concept here is we wanted to look at their original document and just follow their standards. What did they say? What did the Democrats say in the House of Representatives that was so egregious, that deserved impeachment? We got to be clear on what that is. This is their document. It's their impeachment proceedings. They're the ones initiating all this stuff. So they get to define the terms. They get to tell us what conduct is illegal. And this is sort of the starting document. And I want to just revisit this briefly before we dive into the memorandum that was submitted. So if you recall, the original article of impeachment was not particularly heavy on a lot of facts. I clipped out the stuff that I thought was most pertinent, and I want to just run through it briefly. Remember, it's about 4 or 5 pages, and most of it was just, hey, we're the House of Representatives, we have the authority to do this stuff. But this is where they're saying this conduct is bad. So let's revisit this, because this is the preceding document. This is going to lead in to the next memo that we're going to discuss. It says, on January 6th, pursuant to the 12th Amendment of the Constitution, the House of Representatives was meeting. They were counting the votes in the Electoral College. We got that. In the months preceding the joint session, President Trump, and you can see I underlined this in red, repeatedly issued false statements. So we're going to just take that as one of their claims of being a problem. So I have it underlined, repeatedly issued false statements. All right, we got it. They're upset about false statements that were said repeatedly. Got it. All right. They're asserting that the presidential election results were the product of widespread fraud and should not be accepted by the American people or certified by the federal or state officials. Shortly before the joint session occurred, Trump addressed a crowd in the ellipse of Washington, D.C. There, he reiterated false claims. So the same false claims. So that's not a new element. It's going to be the same false claims. And they have some specific language here now. So this is the evidence. This is the candy bar that they took without paying for. This is, we won the election, said Trump, and we won it by a landslide. landslide. So they're singling this out. It's underlined in red and it's in quotes. They're not happy about that phrase in conjunction with this reportedly issued false statements. Got it. So now we have two things that they've identified that are bad, illegal conduct. All right. He also willfully made statements that, in context, encouraged and foreseeably resulted in lawless action at the Capitol, such as, we have another quote, we have a sentence, another statement that they are not happy about. And the statement, of course, we've all heard it many times. It says, quote, "If you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore," end quote. And that's it. Then they say, thus, incited by President Trump, members of the crowd he had addressed in an attempt to, among other objectives, interfere with the joint session, unlawfully breached and vandalized the Capitol. So everything in this second paragraph, this final paragraph here, is what happened. So we're looking at the preceding activities, the preceding statements that Trump made. So these false statements plus these two quotes led to the breaching of the Capitol building. So we've got Trump's conduct and where it led. And this is where this whole idea of the incitement of insurrection comes from. So we have to identify, what are they talking about? If they're saying Donald Trump incited the insurrection, well, how did he do that? They have to define what that term is, and they've done that for us. They've said repeatedly issued false statements. We won this election. We won it in a landslide, which they're saying is a false statement. And then they're also saying, if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore. Okay, so now he's saying if you don't fight like hell, implying that they're going to go and fight like hell because they want to still maintain a country. Then all of the bad things happen. And we sort of looked at this in the purview of the entire article. One little caveat on that, there was another paragraph where they were talking about the Brad Raffensperger phone call. So I left that out. I personally don't think that that's a big issue. I think that's sort of a ancillary issue that they just threw in there. That was, of course, the phone call that was between Trump, his attorneys, and Raffensperger and his attorneys to discuss what was going on with the election litigation. It was, in my mind, it was exactly a settlement conference. Same thing we have in criminal law, same thing you have in family law, juvenile law, a personal injury, they have settlement agreements and settlement cases. All sorts of these things happen in law. If you're going to have a settlement agreement about an election, guess what you have to talk about there? Votes. You have to talk about votes. Who got the votes? Where'd they go? Can you find them? What happened? How was the process of counting? All of that stuff. So they wanted to make a big deal of that because Trump used some language in there that I thought was not good. It was I wouldn't use that language. I wouldn't encourage a client to use that language, but I don't think that it was illegal or that it was overly burdensome given the context of what was being discussed there. So we're kind of going to glance over that, but just for the sake of, I would say, fullness, and I want to make sure that we're covering this thing from both ends. That is another argument that is brought up. Another reason why I'm not particularly interested in that argument is because were they going to impeach him after that phone call? Were they going to impeach him? After that came to light, after that was published, that audio was leaked, was there a sudden call to impeach him? There probably was, but was that a serious movement? No, it wasn't until the Capitol Hill stuff happened. And so in my mind, that is the threshold issue. It is the Capitol Hill speech. It is the Capitol Hill breach that is leading to an impeachable offense, not the Raffensperger phone call. So now that we know what they're talking about, and this is from their own document, right? I didn't draft this document. The article of impeachment has a pretty narrow scope. And what I mean by scope is the things that we're allowed to talk about. So let's go back to the candy bar analogy. You steal a candy bar, you get charged with stealing a candy bar, and you go into court. You can only talk about that candy bar. You can only talk about that day, that location, that time, what you did, that conduct in particular. If they want to come in and at the day of trial for your candy bar theft, they want to say, oh yeah, by the way, we're going to charge you with the theft of that TV also. You go, wait a minute. I didn't know I was being charged with that. It's called due process. I have a right to confront my accuser. It's the confrontation clause. We have all of these procedures in place to make sure that you don't get sprung on with different charges at the very last minute. So the scope is limited. It's only limited to the candy bar. Same type of thing is going on here. The original article of incitement or article of impeachment, which is referencing incitement, is pretty narrow. It's just about 4 pages, and it has those 3 elements, 4 if you want to include the Raffensperger stuff. Not a lot there. And so when you sort of plot that out, this is what it looks like. This is the scope of the impeachment, according to the article of impeachment that was submitted in the House of Representatives. And you can see here, we're talking about the false statements, which I already mentioned, the "we won by a landslide" quote. We're also looking at, if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore. And I even put in there the Raffensperger phone call. And this is the scope. Everything else that's inside, anything that's inside of this blue circle is the stuff that we can talk about because it's within the scope. It's been identified previously. Anything that's outside of this circle, outside of this hula hoop, as it were, is not. It's outside of the scope. But something interesting happened, right? And before we get there, let's take a look at maybe there's a lot of other things that they could have talked about, right? And this is what that might be. So inside the hula hoop is the stuff that is in the article of impeachment, and outside, until today, all of this other stuff was outside of the scope. So Trump making, Trump's other language. Trump has made a lot of statements, a lot of tweets. We have his tweets are outside. They didn't mention that in the article of impeachment. Sidney Powell wasn't mentioned. Rudy Giuliani wasn't mentioned. Donald Trump wasn't mentioned. Anything that was basically outside of the non-Save America rally stuff was all outside the scope previously. The rioter causing physical damage to the Capitol building, anything about Linwood, all of the statements about the rioters, none of that was included in the original document. It was all outside of the scope. But then when we look at the new memorandum that was filed today, that's 80 pages, this is now what it looks like. Everything has been brought in. Everything from outside of the hula hoop has been just sort of crammed right inside into the scope. And you can see just how this change happened, right? It went from inside to everything that was outside. It's all inside the scope now. And the way that I sort of, my high level take on all of this is the old narrative, the old theme of this case was Trump's irresponsible rhetoric on January 6th was the direct cause of the incitement. It was the direct cause of the Capitol Hill insurrection. That narrative is now changing. It's now Trump's irresponsible rhetoric before, during, and after the January 6th Capitol Hill riots was the cause, the incitement of the Capitol Hill insurrection. And it's even worse than that. He didn't just cause what happened on Capitol Hill, but he's also now a continuing threat to America. So you see how the scope sort of changes a little bit. And I read through most of the 80 pages. I read through all of Donald Trump's response. And that's sort of just how I synthesize it into the Democrats' argument, that they're expanding the scope. And they're now saying that a lot of Trump's behavior before, after, during, his response after the Capitol Hill riots was all inappropriate. And it's all impeachable now as a result. So the scope, it gets much bigger, as we're going to see. And we even saw this sort of narrative change from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She was on an Instagram Live last night, and here she is saying that none of this took place on the 6th. Okay, this was a problem well before the 6th. And this can open up a whole can of worms. I mean, this is now where we're talking about, why did Mayor Bowser refuse to have the National Guard there or any additional federal resources? They were not there. There was a January 5th letter that she sent out, signed by her, that we covered on this channel, disavowing any additional help from the feds. Same thing. Why did the Capitol Hill Chief of Police, Stephen Sund, why was he sort of bringing to the Sergeant of Arms attention that this is a problem? We're expecting this to be an issue. And the Sergeant of Arms from both chambers in Congress just refused any additional help. Well, what the heck? So if they knew this was going to be a problem and they undersecured the facilities, is the government negligent? Are they contributory? Is their negligence contributing to this entire debacle? Or was this all just Donald Trump? Because that's what the original allegation has been. At least it was that for a while. Then Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said, no, Ted Cruz tried to murder her. So it's not just Donald Trump. It's Donald Trump and Ted Cruz who tried to murder her. Literally, she said that on Twitter. We covered that. So you're seeing how the narrative is sort of unraveling just a little bit. Let's check in with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and see what she has to say. She put this on her Instagram Live. I think this was last night.
One of the things that I would like us to dispel is the idea that this insurrection and this attack happened suddenly, that we couldn't see it coming, and that it was like just this outburst and all of a sudden a bunch of people rushed the Capitol. I want to dispel with that notion very quickly, because everybody knew that something was going to happen. And again, I do not speak for any other. Let me actually rewind this. And I'll try to recenter. And again, as I said, thank you for your patience here.
You're welcome.
But what I'm about to tell you is my account. how I perceive things with my eyes, my ears, my nose, my mouth, my body. I cannot speak for what anyone else saw, etc., unless there was someone in the room with me. But here's what I will tell you. A week before, 1 week before, the week prior to the insurrection, I started to get text messages that I needed to be careful. And that in particular, I needed to be careful about the 6th.
Okay, so who the hell sent those text messages? Where did they come from? Who was warning you about that? Did you notify anybody else? Did you send that anywhere else? And maybe she explains this as we go on, but I didn't watch the whole thing. Of course, Miss Faith clipped that for us because I'm not a particular Instagram user. But that's my question. So she's saying this whole thing was planned, that this had happened previously. Up to a week there was indication that this was going to be a big problem, and so you can't have it both ways. Either Donald Trump gave a speech on January 6th that led directly, he was the direct cause, he was the inciter of the insurrection. Or this was planned a week before and he wasn't. His speech was inconsequential because it was going to happen anyways. And now what they're trying to do in order to respond to that, because that doesn't look so good, if this was a planned ordeal, which many people are now, new evidence is coming out that it was. I think that they were breaching the Capitol before Donald Trump was even done speaking. And it looked like, there were pipe bombs planted the night before, and there's more evidence that, other people were raising the red flags before it happened. So either Donald Trump was out there inciting this thing with his language, or he wasn't. And if he wasn't, then their impeachment facade looks like a sham. And how do they craft that then? The goalposts have to move. They have to change what the definition is. Now it's not so much about him giving a bad speech and saying, you got to fight like hell, as we saw in the original article of impeachment. Now it's different. Now the scope has to be expanded to talk about all of the other things that he has said prior to that date that nobody wanted to impeach him for until the Capitol Hill stuff happened. So now they're just sort of moving the goalposts a little bit and saying, okay, well, now all of that other conduct, all of those other tweets, everything else that was taking place between November 3rd and January 6th, he's culpable for that. He was creating this environment based on his language that led to the insurrection, which is a different argument. You may agree with it or disagree with it, but it's a different argument. The original article of impeachment said history of false statements combined with 2 other statements given at the Save America rally on January 6th. This new argument goes all the way back to November 3rd and even prior to November 3rd. They're saying, well, he was sowing doubts about the election before any of that even took place. And so, you just have to keep that in mind. I want to lay out a big picture framework before we dive into this memo. And just watch how much the goalposts change and how much bigger the argument gets. So let's take a look at the document. Thank you for indulging me on that 20-minute introduction. But this is now a trial memorandum that is being filed in the Senate of the United States, the sitting court of impeachment. It's in the matter of impeachment of President Donald Trump, the 45th president, trial memorandum of the United States on the impeachment trial, and it's signed by these Democrats. And you may have noticed them in the thumbnail. I think we put Ted Lieu on there, Eric Swalwell, we got Joe Quinn Castro, and I think I got Jamie Raskin on there. But these are all the House Democrats who are the impeachment managers. One of these people I think is a representative from the Virgin Islands, not even a congressperson. I think it's Stacey Plaskett. But if you go on the New York Times, they're doing a sort of a biography on each one of these individuals. Who is Joe Quinn Castro? Let's take a look at the guy leading the charge of Donald Trump's impeachment. What a hero. All right, so go check that out if you're interested in any of that.